I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I can drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead. Make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
Welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. What a day it's already been. The big Manafort trial. Gates coming out and say, "Yep, we broke the law." And understand, this is a smart thing for the defense. Get it out there. Don't let it be the first thing out of your mouth is, "Yes, we broke the law." So the prosecution put Gates on the stand. He admits it. "I'm guilty. We did all this." And then, hey, obviously the plea agreement, which you had to know it was going to come out. If you've ever watched TV trials, that's one of the first things the defense hammers on. So that's coming. Get ready. Now, this to me, a huge trial. Huge. It's got to go the right way. And look, the evidence, as it's laid out, they already admitted. He said, "Yeah, I did it with him." Going to be interesting to see. So lots of that to get to, lots to talk about. Just craziness going on all around us. But I wanted to start off by, because this is one of the things over the course of today that just grabbed my attention. Evidently a new book out, and I'm going to work very hard to get this author on the program. A new book out called Squeezed, Why Our Families Can't Afford America. And, we've been talking about the American dream and how much more it's out of our reach and how expensive things are getting and how really, cost of living is just crazy. You talk to people and they're struggling to get by. And I remember, in years past, and she points this out in the blurbs that I've read in the book, that, before the great collapse in 2008, only a quarter of the people surveyed in any of these polls would say that they were anything less than middle class. And I've had this experience, in talking with people over the years. No one's going to say that they're lower middle class or lower class. And when you're looking, everyone's middle class, everyone, which just kind of defies logic because there's got to be a top and a bottom if you're going to have a middle. But anyway, one woman sticks out in my mind. She was making like 16 grand a year, driving a 20-year-old car, renting and all of these struggles. And she said that she was solidly middle class because she didn't take anything from the government. That was her rationale. Which is what put her in, and I don't understand it, but it's what got her to think, hey, I can make it to tomorrow. And nor did I want to burst that bubble by saying that, our kids got school lunch programs and they got earned income tax credits and, all of the other subsidies that we don't really think a lot about. But this new book is pointing out that in her view, and in a lot of these different studies, it's 30% more expensive now to be in the middle class than it was 20 years ago. And in a lot of areas, as she's pointing out, it's almost double the cost of what it was just 20 years ago. And, a lot of that has to do with, rising prices and rising cost of living and rising property values and rising rents and all of that stuff. But the other part of it is stagnant wages. For the last 40 years, we've had stagnant and declining wages. And you look at this Bush tax cut that we were told was going to help boost wages, hasn't. In fact, what it's done is just the opposite. All of these companies who got these huge windfalls, where in years past may have shared a little bit, haven't. They've bought back their shares of stock. They've enriched themselves. And in fact, one study I saw, and I forget what the company was, but they said they could give like an $18,000 raise to all of their employees. With the buybacks that they were doing, they could easily, pay this huge sum to all of their employees. But instead, no, not going to do that. Going to buy our shares back and pump up the price and make ourselves really wealthy. And, it used to be illegal to do that, but, we're living in a new day. And in this book, she goes into, a bunch of things from the blurbs that I've read of how things have gotten so out of hand to where, you've got, this married couple that she talks about, the Nicole and Barry are their names. And they're both teachers, and they both make, like 69 grand a year. They live in California. And, to buy a house in their neighborhood is now $680,000. Just to exist cost, tons of money. In fact, he works part-time driving as one of these Uber drivers in the evenings. Instead of grading papers, instead of doing curriculum. Nope, out there hustling for pennies. And this is the story of so many people in professions that we used to think of as solidly middle class, like teachers and lawyers. The one thing that, that I read is that, like in a lot of states, which is mind-blowing, in a lot of states, half of the people who have law degrees don't even practice law because there are no jobs. And I remember back when I bought my first house, back in the early 90s, the real estate agent had a law degree. And I'm like, why would you not be practicing law? She said, it's getting tougher, and the wages are coming down, and this is more lucrative. I make more money selling houses than I can being a lawyer. And at the time, I was fiddling with the idea of, maybe I want to go to law school. Maybe this is something that I want to pursue. And she's like, don't even think about it. You're going to put yourself, and it's the best advice I ever got. You're going to put yourself, 100 grand in debt minimum. And then you're going to work for, 10 years at peanut wages, 100 hours a week to maybe get to the next step, at which point you never get to the room. And, again, best advice I ever got. But it was one of those things where, we were on this trajectory already. We were on this downward slide already then. And then the collapse of 2008 happens. And as, the premise of the book is that as this collapse happens, everybody falls backwards. We're all worse off because of it. We're all basically screwed because of it. And wages continue to fall. And benefits continue to be eviscerated. And that American dream that we grew up believing in, further out of sight, further out of reach. And, she goes into, as I get it, the fact that, education is more expensive, housing is more expensive, healthcare is more expensive, childcare is most expensive. And the one example that she pointed out in Montreal, as she points out, the average childcare cost, because the government helps subsidize it, costs families between $7 and $20 a day, $7 to $20 a day, which means you could pay anywhere, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year, because they get 2 weeks vacation. Most of us don't, is somewhere between $1,700 and $5,000 a year for childcare. That's a huge savings over here in the U.S. where, these childcare centers where your kids are warehoused in a big place cost upwards of $11,000 a year. And, if you want, better, obviously more. But the average U.S. range is somewhere between, 11 and 28 grand a year. Or as they point out, in New York, for instance, over 21% of your income goes to childcare. If you've got 2 kids, that goes up to almost 39%. And when you look at that, I'm going, and this is one of the discussions my wife and I had before we had kids. It's like, do we institutionalize our children? Do we put them in childcare and pay outrageous sums of one of our incomes or both of our incomes just so our kids can be warehoused, or does one of us stay home? Now, obviously, I wanted to be the one staying home, but that didn't work out because, gender inequality in this country, she made significantly less than I did. So I continued to work, and she worked much harder at home with the kids. And in retrospect, probably a pretty good deal for me. But, you look at this and, and I'm going to work really hard to get this woman on because she points out that even college professors that we used to think of as, solidly middle class, the upper crust, if you will, because they're the really educated, they're the really smart people, usually with doctorate degrees. She points out that professors at college level right now, and she had a perfect quote, which was, chances are the professors are living in basements and eating ramen noodles at a higher rate than students are today. And that got me thinking because, most of the adjuncts I know are starving. Most of them are working for really peanut poverty wages, except the ones who are, work teaching at the APSCUF schools, the Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education Schools here in Pennsylvania, because they're unionized. They have some union benefits, and others across the country are doing it. But, you talk to some of these professors who are teaching at multiple colleges, multiple classes, and you're making just peanuts at it. And as where, years ago, professors were looked at it on, pretty much a high level, and they were respected, and the majority of them had tenure. I remember going back and thinking about, some of the professors I had who lived in really nice houses, drove decent cars. And you look at it, I think the statistics she used back in 1975, over 45% of full-time professors were tenured. That number is down to, according to her number, 16%. I mean, that is a massive drop. And, what we hear is, oh, you can't get too uppity because automation is coming. And, yeah, automation is coming. And it's coming regardless of what we do. In everything that we do. And, somebody hit me with an email today saying, I put something on Facebook saying that, this McDonald's executive wrote an op-ed last month that I didn't bother talking about because it's just more bad talking points. The entry-level jobs are going to go away and teenagers aren't going to have jobs, and, kind of pushing that narrative that the only people who work in the fast food industry now are teenagers and kids getting their first jobs, when I don't know when I'm someone who goes to McDonald's way too often. And virtually every person that I run into is somewhere in the 30 to 50 to 60 range. Virtually everyone I see, unless you're on the Saturday morning where the kids, I can work Saturday mornings. Every day during the week, these are people who are struggling to make ends meet. But he writes this article and, saying, well, it's, this is we're going to automate because, labor costs are going out of hand and, things are getting crazy and, you're asking for too much and, just hitting all of those talking points when the reality is, look, they're going to automate. Even if the minimum wage were $1 an hour, if it costs 99 cents to automate, they're still going to automate. They're still going to have Flippy, the burger flipper, do the burgers because Flippy doesn't get sick. Flippy doesn't miss the burger. They're still going to automate it because guess what? Flippy cost them a penny an hour less, regardless of what the wage is. And this is the thing that just blows my mind because most people go, oh, see, you're just pricing yourself out of a job. No, it doesn't matter what you do. Let me be very clear on this because this is one of those things that just kind of I thought was common sense. Maybe common sense isn't common anymore. But the second they figure out how to replace you with something just a penny cheaper, kiss your sweet little behind goodbye. Bye-bye, out the door. As soon as they can figure out how to get a machine to do what you do, goodbye. There's no loyalty. Come on. You gotta understand that. And what this is all about is slowing the movement to raise the minimum wage for now. They know they're going to fully automate. In fact, the guy in the article points out that by 2020, McDonald's will have kiosks, these ordering kiosks in every McDonald's across the country. Think about that. That's only a year and a half away. So what the grocery stores and Home Depot and all these other places are trying to get you to do, which is be your own cashier, which I don't do. In fact, my daughter gets really frustrated with me because it's kind of a funny exercise to see me go through the checkout at night at the local supermarket because they only have the kiosks. I have everything all screwed up to where the woman has to then come over and fix it for me because I'm illiterate. I'm technologically illiterate, and not because I don't know how to use it, but because this is somebody's job. This is that job that puts food on the table, that feeds the family, that keeps the roof over the head, puts sugar and shoes in the house. It's just mind-blowing to me. But I'm going to talk about that a little bit more today. There's so much that I'm just bubbling fumes over that I want to get to. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, fantastic story here in Pennsylvania. A guy running for state senate in the 36th senatorial district here in Pennsylvania was involved in a massive crash. In really bad shape at the beginning of the year. Had collected all of his signatures, and before he had a chance to turn them in, this crash happened. And it's a great story that, how he got on the ballot and all of this, and now he's running. And I think it's a great story, which is why when we come back, we're going to talk with Bill Troutman about his run for Senate here in Pennsylvania. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people.
10% of the people own 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people own 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2012. That was the day a release of flammable vapor led to a fire at the Chevron refinery in Richmond, California. A level 3 community warning system alert was issued for the cities of Richmond, San Paulo, and North Richmond. Toxic black smoke could be seen for miles while the fire burned for hours. 19 workers were nearly incinerated trying to escape the fire. More than 15,000 area residents sought medical treatment for chest pains, breathing problems, headaches, and sore throats. The Chemical Safety Board found that the release was caused by a leaking pipe that eventually ruptured. The pipe, made of carbon steel, suffered sulfidec corrosion. The Chemical Safety Board noted that for 40 years, the refinery industry had known that carbon steel corrodes at a much faster rate than higher chromium content steel pipe. The pipe in question had no shutoff valve to isolate the leak. In its final report, the Chemical Safety Board issued a number of findings. They found that Chevron knew of the corrosion but did nothing to prevent it. As well, Chevron not only failed to perform 100% component inspections, but it also rejected earlier recommendations to inspect and replace the pipe that would eventually fail. When it came to emergency response, Chevron failed to identify and communicate process controls or damage mechanisms in the incident command structure. They also had no leak response guidance or formal protocol to determine how to handle a process leak. The Chemical Safety Board found the safety culture lacking. Workers were reluctant to use their stop work authority and were often encouraged to continue operations despite hazardous conditions. The Chemical Safety Board issued a number of recommendations, including more stringent regulatory enforcement. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Lessons of the past we all learn with workers' blood. The mistakes of the bosses we must pay for. From the cities to the farmlands and churches full of mud. 'Cause war has always been the boss's way, sir. Come on!
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. So as I said, my next guest is, just an incredible story in a horrible, tragic accident, a head-on collision. Just, one of those terrifying moments. And on his mind, still thinking about, I'm going to run for office, which, wow, I'm literally almost speechless when it comes to it, which is why I've got Bill Troutman on the line to come talk a little bit about his campaign as he runs for Senate here in the 36th district here in Pennsylvania. Bill, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, thank you for having me on, Rick.
The most important issues of the day.
What happened?
This is the Rick Smith Show.
Well, I was on my way to work 6 o'clock in the morning. I was actually working up at Tobyhanna Army Depot at the time. So I was coming from Elizabethtown trying to get over to 81. And right as I was coming to the crest of a hill, I got to see the grill of a Suburban.
Oh.
Right as it ran into me. I never had a chance to put my foot on the brake pedal. It was right at the top of a knoll, and there it was. When they got me to the hospital, they stopped counting broken bones at 40. Crushed my chest, tore my diaphragm, punctured a lung. But I overheard a little bit of what you were saying. I was laying on the blacktop, waiting for the ambulance to get there, and state police trooper come over to me and asked me if there was anything he could do for me. And I knew that my signed petitions were in a folder in the back of my VW microvan. So I said to him, I said, can you check and see if the orange folder is still intact over there in the back of the van, because it has a lot of important papers in. And I watched him as he went over, and he held it up and showed it to me, and then he tucked it underneath the back seat. And he come back over to me and told me that he's not allowed to give that to me because it's evidence, but we could pick it up the next day at the impound.
Wow.
Ambulance took me to the hospital. When I got there, my wife was there, and I told her I needed my cell phone. Before I went into surgery, I got a chance to call the superintendent of the company I was working for and say, hey, I need that folder that was tucked underneath the back seat, and I need you to get it to my wife. And another person who's running for the 98th district down here, Mary Ocker Enders, got all the paperwork together, got the rest of my petitions together. A lot of local 743 brothers were getting signatures for me. She got everything together and bring a notary to my hospital room after surgery. And what I had left was my left hand, so I could make X's on the petitions as the notary notarized them, so they could go to Harrisburg to get me on the ballot.
Wow, that's an incredible story. But I guess I'm sitting here thinking of all the things that I would be thinking about lying on the ground. Body broken, probably thinking that could this be my last breath. You're thinking about petitions. Wow.
I was gargling a little bit, but at that point, I really didn't realize how bad I was broken. But I knew I was broken pretty good.
And as I understand, while you're in the hospital recovering, while you're doing therapy and you're going through all this, you're holding meetings in your room on, getting your volunteers out and pushing your name out.
Sunday evening, 7 o'clock, they bring the folding chairs in. We'd have a meeting. Got a campaign manager and a pro writer and a couple other people and volunteers from my hospital with my laptop, and we started moving forward.
Now, this should be the story, a national story. This should be one of these things. Look, a lot of people overcome things. In a head-on collision, more than 40 broken bones, gurgling blood on the highway. This should be one of those things. Of this guy wants to run. This guy wants to win.
There's a lot of things that have to change in the state of Pennsylvania. I mean, there's so many things that I want to run for. I could talk for a long time.
I know you're a union member. I know you're IBW local 743 member. I know you're an electrician. I'm sure that's part of the passion. Because if Scott Wagner wins, My fear is, and please let that not happen, Pennsylvania becomes a right-to-work state and all of the no rights at work agenda goes slamming itself through. So having another sane voice in the Senate would be very helpful. But what's the hill that Bill Troutman dies on? What's that one issue you say that, while I'm laying on the ground, this is what I'm thinking about?
Oh, it's hard to pin down to one issue, but basically, I want to serve the people of the 36th district, and I want to make sure that like the children of my family, my neighbors' families, and excuse my dog, I gotta move to a different room.
Yeah, obviously, we want to do things with kids, with Chip, with education. There's so much that we need to do, and I think this governor, I think Tom Wolf has done as best as he can, given the makeup of what we see in the Senate and the House. And the hope is that we find folks like you to give him some backup.
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, I have two children. I have a 27-year-old and a 24-year-old, and when I was their age, jobs were a lot easier to come by. They paid better. The benefits came with them. And I'm looking out here at the job market that my children have to face. And the pay scale isn't there. The benefits aren't there. So we got to make a change. We got to bring back better health care, affordable health care, better wages, so that these kids have a fighting chance that maybe they can have the American dream too.
So do we find ourselves on the Medicare for All train? Where do you see the most, and I know that's a federal issue, it's part of it, but here in Pennsylvania, we could use the Affordable Care Act, what's left of it, to push for some really, really good changes. Where do you find yourself?
Exactly there. We need to make changes with the Affordable Care Act. Absolutely. We can generate more affordable and better health care by improving on that Affordable Care Act.
Because Pennsylvania actually is one of the states that's doing it fairly well. I mean, the rates have been not skyrocketing like we've seen in other places across the country. It's a fairly stable market in how things are going on here. There's, most of the places have lots of choices. I would like to see them be better, but as of right now, I think Pennsylvania is one of the states doing it really well.
Oh yeah, next year I think Pennsylvanians are only going to see like a 1% increase in their insurance. So that's way better than most of the states out there.
Yeah, I mean, and I look at your accident, and this is one of these moments where health insurance being so very important. Now, look, I understand that the other driver, if he's insured, and we hope that he is, or your insurance. This is one of those moments where, while you're laying on the ground, the last thing that you want to be thinking about is, am I going to get the care that I need? Is it going to bankrupt me? And now, as I understand, and you can help me if I'm wrong here, but you've had some of the back and forth with the insurance companies and all that, but not to the worrying extent that I think most people would.
Oh no, not at all. I mean, I know that because I'm a union member, that my benefits will pay the bills. I don't have to worry about losing my house. There's a lot of people out there in Pennsylvania that, but at this point, the banks would probably be foreclosing. They'd be looking at bankruptcy maybe. And that is one of the reasons that I need to run. I need to win, because there's a lot of people out there who aren't fortunate enough to have that kind of armor that will protect them in a situation like this. That's another reason that I have to get into the Senate.
No, I mean, it's, to me, this is one of those moments where, just having you say that, knowing that I have the security of my union behind me, that when something bad happens, there's going to be someone behind me. I think that's the key message out of a lot of this.
Absolutely. I mean, without that backing, and I don't even know where I'd be. I'd probably be insane right now, but a lot of other people would be in the same shoes. So we have to continue to push for the ability for collective bargaining. We have to fight off right to work. We have to continue fighting for the Prevailing Wage Act. I mean, that's the only thing we can do to keep strength and benefits for the working families.
Yeah, and I think, in the coming years, going to have to do a lot on the state level to undo some of the extreme effects of what the Janus decision is going to do. A lot of these anti-worker pieces of a lot of these anti-worker legislation may be coming out of the federal level. Some of the Supreme Court cases that I expect coming on the state level, I think we're going to have to start fighting and really having folks who understand. Now, your opponent, this Ryan Ament, who I've never been a fan of, probably one of the most anti-worker guys in the Senate. I look at the two of you and I'm going, there's a real choice here, and for especially for union members, there is a real choice here.
Absolutely, I am hopeful that all the union members know that I'm out there running for them, and I'm also trying to improve the benefits and wages of all the people who aren't protected by unions, all at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those moments where very much so, a decision that, in my view, if you work for a living, you punch a clock, there really isn't a decision here.
There's absolutely no decision. I mean, when I was a kid growing up, once I was old enough to understand a little bit about paying the bills and feeding the family. Both my parents worked at a crippled children's hospital just outside of Elizabethtown, where I'm from. My dad was AFSCME member. He was a fiscal accountant. My mom was an AFSCME member. She was a custodian there. And because of those union wages and benefits that they had, we had a little bit better life. But I was in a neighborhood on a little one-way street where a lot of the neighbors around us didn't have that kind of protection. So, they always talked to us about all of that, so we understood what was going on. So I knew at an early age that union representation is the only way to survive.
Yeah, I mean, that to me, that's the message. And growing up as a kid, I grew up in a housing project in the west side of Cleveland, and anytime you saw someone get a union job, their lives immediately got better. And I think these are messages that I think are so important to carry, not just through campaigns or through ads, but in everyday life of telling those stories.
Absolutely. I mean, all the guys that I've worked with, as they come in and we organize new members, it's amazing the difference that they see in their life and their lifestyles as they adapt to the union way of life. And it's just great to bring them on board.
Yeah, I mean, for me, to have more working people in the halls of power, to have say in what poison we see being pushed, because, and I'm sure you understand this as well as anyone, all of the national anti-worker stuff is here in Pennsylvania. It's all banging around in the halls of power. Right now, they can't pass it over the governor's veto yet. But if we let our guard down, all of that ugliness could be right here.
Oh, absolutely. It's knocking at our doors right now, especially with Mr. Wagner and his crew. I mean, if they get an opportunity, exactly what you said, I'm afraid is going to happen. I'm afraid we're going to see a downfall in union strength here in Pennsylvania. So we have to make our stand. We have to make our stand now.
So when you're out knocking on doors and because it's got to be a challenge for you to get around after, I mean, are you fully recovered yet, or will you ever be fully recovered?
Well, we're working on my left leg. Actually, mostly everything else is in pretty good shape. They just freed me up from my right hand. So the left leg is slowing me down. I don't know if I'll never get back to where I once was, but I should be able to get back to where I'm back on the job site and earning a good living. Unless I'm lucky enough to get elected in November.
Yeah, then you'll take a pay cut and serve the rest of us.
That's exactly right.
The website, troutmanpa.com. We'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com how folks can take a look at this website and maybe throw you a couple of bucks, because elections mean money. We need to make sure that we get good, decent people elected. Last line of questioning I've got for you. I want to go back to that hill you die on question, because to me, it's one of those things that I think, I believe in compromise. There are things that, we can negotiate on, but there's always that one thing you go, this is, to me, the most important thing. And I'm curious for you, what is that one most important thing?
Okay. Well, compromise is sadly become a dirty word in politics.
No, I think we should be compromising an awful lot more. And there are things we can negotiate around on the fringes. But at the end of it, there's for me, and I'll be honest with you, for me, it's pushing any anti-worker piece of legislation. This, to me, that's the end of it. That's where we cut the line.
Absolutely. But there's plenty of things we can find bipartisan agreement on. I mean, let's see. For example, we did have bipartisan support for a constitutional amendment that would have given the residents of PA the power to do congressional redistricting. And instead, my opponent, Ryan Ahman, killed that by attaching a provision that would have gerrymandered state appeals and Supreme Court judges. Let's see, what else can I think of?
I don't think he was smart enough to think that up on his own. I'm sure that came from higher up.
Oh, I'm sure he was a puppet on that one. Let's talk about bipartisan support for severance tax on natural gas. The citizens of the state, 70% of them wanted to see severance taxes, and quite a few legislatures, but Republican leadership wouldn't let that happen.
Yeah, I just came from Alaska, where they get a $2,700 check. Every citizen gets a $2,700 check every year from the oil industry.
Just think what that would do for Pennsylvanians. Let's see. There is a bipartisan support right now for raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2024. I mean, Governor Wolf started that by taking care of the state workers. And hopefully, once we get there, we can start improving minimum wage for all workers.
I'm right there with you. So good stuff all around. TroutmanPA.com, the website. Check it out. TroutmanPA.com. Bill, I appreciate the time. I wish you the best. I hope you do really well, and I hope you get back to 100% real soon.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rick. Appreciate your time.
Anytime. Good stuff, Bill. Thanks so much. Really, a fantastic story. Honestly, that just is just amazing. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Firefighters, my friend, and the kids locked in the Capitol are fighting till the end. And we're not gonna break tonight, and we're not gonna bend. Some say the union's down, but I asked around, and everybody said, this is a union town, all down the line. This is a union town, all down the line. And if they come to strip our rights away, we'll give them hell every time. This is a union town, all down the line.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1835. That was the day that began the Baltimore Bank Riot. The Bank of Maryland had failed in 1834. Thousands of people who had deposited money in the bank saw their savings vanish. For nearly a year and a half, the depositors wanted their money to be returned. Anger grew. Some of that anger was directed at one of the bank's directors, Reverdy E. Johnson. The bank directors were accused of fraud and speculation that had caused the bank's failure. The bank officials were also dragging their feet on settling accounts with bank clients because the directors wanted to keep their personal fortunes. A crowd gathered around Director Johnson's house and broke out some windows. The mayor of Baltimore ordered a troop of 30 armed guards to protect Johnson's residence. The next day, the angry mob turned their attention to another director, John Glenn. They began to demolish his home before the mounted guards stopped the damage. 2 days later, the mob returned to Director Johnson's home. This time, they were able to overpower the guards. They piled up Johnson's property in the street and set it on fire. The crowd swelled and moved on to destroy property of other bank directors. Revolutionary War veteran Sam Smith organized a militia of 3,000 men to stop the destruction. The leaders of the bank protest were arrested and jailed. The bank directors received $100,000 from the state as compensation for the destruction of their property. The bankers were not held responsible for their actions, which caused the bank to fail. Does this sound familiar? Most of the bankers who caused the 2008 crash also never faced consequences. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Here on the website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, you can give me an email, rick@thericksmithshow.com. So let's find out what's going on around the world and in Washington, D.C. Our good friend Bob Ney, Talk Media News. Bob, what's going on?
Well, there's a lot, Rick. We can start anywhere from the Manafort trial or the Iran sanctions on to who President Obama endorsed or didn't endorse. We can go to the Ohio race, LeBron James. Where do you want to go?
There's tons of stuff. Let's start off first and foremost with the Manafort trial today. Rick Gates comes out, basically admits, yep, this is all the stuff we did. We did it. We're guilty. I'm looking at him going, yeah, you want to throw that out there? Get it out early so the jury forgets it.
Right. And then, well, at one time, the prosecution supposedly wasn't going to provide him for the for the witness testimony, but then the defense wanted him, and then the prosecution said yes. These are always tricky cases because when the defense goes at him, and then they say, well, what were you offered, and on and on and on. And I read some of the transcript on the accountants. So there was two people involved with the financials, and one was that Manafort, both of them basically said he kept a personal eye on things. Then one said that he turned things over to Gates. I think it's one big mess. It'll be fascinating to see the outcome of this one. This is one that the government does not want to lose.
No, because then everything else falls apart. Because no matter what happens, if Manafort walks on this, I don't think it matters what Mueller comes out with. It'll be completely tainted, and everyone will look at it with a jaundiced eye, I think.
Correct. That's correct.
Yeah, I mean, this is an important one, and the next one. I mean, because this trial with Manafort isn't the only one. They've still got the next one in, I guess, in Washington, right?
That's right. And Flynn, I don't think goes to trial because he did a plea deal.
Yeah, he pled.
He doesn't go to trial. Gates doesn't. He's testifying. So Manafort's kind of the guy in the seat right now.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how long it takes them to figure out a sentence for Flynn, because you got to imagine they're still squeezing him.
Right. Yeah. And none of this is over with until the government makes all of its moves.
Yeah, I've been watching it, and it's one of those things that I miss Court TV. You remember the good old days of Court TV?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Or everything was right. Like the OJ trial was, it's legendary because you got to see it every day. It was right there in your face every day. Mm-hmm. You could flip it on and watch it.
Well, my case was in my face every day. I got tired of it.
Yeah, well, you see, here's the thing. And I tell my kids this. I used to love going down and watching trials when I was a kid, because it was better than TV because you could actually smell the people. You could smell them sweating.
Right.
As long as it's not you standing in the hot seat,
right.
It's interesting entertainment.
Right.
And also, I would argue for anyone else, a reason not to break any laws. Just kind of a thought there.
Correct.
But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. Let's move on to the Trump Tower meeting. Evidently now it happened.
Well, there's inconsistency. The only thing that is consistent is inconsistency.
Right.
And the president had made a statement he wasn't involved in the draft. Then he was involved with the draft, I believe, with Hope Hicks aboard Air Force One. And then originally it was for adoption purposes of children between Russia and America, adoption. And then the president acknowledged that it was for opposition research on the opponent, which was Hillary Clinton, and which is done all the time by campaigns. That one, didn't surprise me. Just surprised me one of the Trumps met with.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Opposition research happens all the time, not with a foreign adversary.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And so it surprises me. I mean, if somebody says I have information, they usually send some kind of campaign person just to filter it out. But, obviously the Russians wanted to meet with the top dogs. So that's what happened. And now the president's inconsistent. The only thing inconsistent on. He says he didn't know about the meeting before the meeting happened. Now, Mueller's team are looking at this, and this is being leaked out by the Trump team, not the Mueller team, but they're looking, Rick, at, again, obstruction of justice on this particular case because, did he fill out a statement for his son, intending his son to say certain things? So that, once again, goes in that scope that we're starting to see of the obstruction of justice.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at Junior, kind of like Fredo. He's the one. He's getting the kiss of death, man. I think he. And if you're Kushner, you got to wonder if you're not far from being tossed under the bus too. Because looking at his tweets, I'm like, did he just throw Junior under the bus? I mean, and if you're the other one, you gotta, the stupid one, you gotta wonder as well.
Mm-hmm.
I can never remember the stupid one's name.
It's going to be interesting. That's for sure.
Yeah, look, he's gonna save himself.
Mm-hmm.
Which there's no doubt in that whatsoever. Let's move along to the other big one of the day. Obviously, President Obama's endorsement list, and I took a lot of flack for this because I've got my problems with Obama, and I got my problems with a lot of centrist Democrats. Couple of names not on the list.
Mm-hmm. Well, the most prominent, of course, is, Joe Crowley was a long-time 14-year incumbent Democrat, and he got beat.
Yep.
And she is not on the list right now. Now, there's a secondary list coming out in November. We'll see what happens. As I understand it, and these weren't from inside sources, but in some of the reports it said that President Obama had tended to stay away at this point in time from endorsements of people who beat incumbent Democrats.
Okay.
Is what they were saying.
Now, is it like in the Crowley situation where evidently his name's going to be on the ballot, just, I guess, under the Working Families Party, I think it is?
Oh, is it?
Yeah, I'm looking at this as another Lieberman opportunity.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I'm looking at that going, because there was a push like right after the next couple of days afterwards, because there's some weird thing in the New York law that his name, I guess, can be on the ballot.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
I don't know that he's actually running a campaign, so I don't know, but it is what it is. I also didn't endorse Andrew Cuomo, which I thought was interesting.
I did. I thought that was interesting too. He also did not go with Senator Feinstein.
Yeah, but who would? Yeah, look, I mean, again, another one of these middle of the road kind of, and I know I'm going to get a bunch of email from people complaining that she's done a lot on women's rights, and she has. But she's that middle of the road kind of, just a little left of center. When I think we at this moment in history we can do better.
Well, she's actually been kind of hawkish on certain intel issues and things.
No, that's the other part of it as well. And speaking of intel, what are we hearing about Rand Paul? I guess over in Russia, with the Russians going, hey, speak up for our girl.
It's kind of amazing. There was a congressional delegation trip that flew under the radar screen. Nobody talked about that thing.
No, I did. It was over 4th of July. How could you not?
Oh, did you? Well, you're the only one I know of because that was mum. That one stayed way under the radar screen.
No, I mean, I thought it was kind of treasonous. I mean, you're gonna go on Independence Day. You're gonna be in Russia, really?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the messaging out of that was just blaring to me. Now to see Rand Paul, who evidently, who was it? I think McCain came out and said that he's working for the Kremlin now.
Oh, is that what McCain said? Well, I don't know.
So it's going to be interesting to see if Rand Paul does come back and speak up for this. That Maria, I forget her name too.
Butina.
There you go, Butina.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be interesting to see if he does, come back and speak up for her. Because they, it was directly asked, please go back, and it would make you such a man.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what he says to the media when he returns, because they'll for sure ask him.
Why would you do that? I mean, you've been in this game long enough.
No.
What's the draw?
That's so weird.
What's the draw for a politician to go there?
Well, I remember when members would, run over and fly over and talk to Gaddafi when he was on the no-no list, or they would go to North Korea or, whatever. I know we were asked to have some contact with the Iranians, not in Iran, but over here at the United Nations. And even though the White House asked us to do that, that was Clinton and Bush, we got slapped around for daring to do it, you know. But that was when a new president came in, Khatami, and was trying to be a moderate. In this case, it's so hot with Russia, I'm surprised anybody's going over right now.
Now, who would want that? Who would want that? I mean, honestly.
Right.
Because you can only get slapped with the collusion angle.
Correct.
Yeah, it's just mind blowing to me. And finally, Iran. I guess the nuclear deal long off. I guess we're going after some new sanctions. Is that happening?
What was the show? This is a fine mess we're in. I can't remember what that show was, but it certainly applies to this. You know, as you know, I lived in Iran in 1978 when the revolution began against the Shah, and I watched the Iran issue when I was in Congress under both Presidents Clinton and Bush, and then President Obama negotiated the Iran nuclear agreement. Now, that agreement was with, of course, not just us. It was with Russia and China and Europe, and everybody signed on, and then the sanctions were lifted, both us and the United Nations, because we put them on and the UN put them on, and we all lifted them. Now, having said that, there was that escape valve in there that every 90 days the president can say, this works or it doesn't work. When Secretary of State Tillerson was there, the president got angry about it, but he recertified the Iran deal. And then as soon as Tillerson was booted out and Pompeo came in and John Bolton, National Security Advisor, it was over with. So it was negated. Now today's sanctions, Rick, immediately voids a contract with Boeing and Iran to provide passenger planes, not aircraft, not warcraft, passenger planes, because Iran has an aging infrastructure to it, and there's been a lot of air problems, air crashes and near crashes. So that's one aspect. Here's the problem, though. This one's on coal and steel and aluminum, et cetera, and any entity that deals with Iran. The next ones are going to be on oil in November, and that'll be before the election. You can bet that. And the problem with all of this is the sanctions were undone by agreement of multiple countries, and businesses were created. Now, those businesses just can't fold up with Iran, but they may be in crosshairs of the United States and potentially even taken to trial in our court system for dealing with Iran. So you just can't undo all these businesses. This is going to make a pretty big mess. Now, the overall picture, though, the White House thinks that they are helping the Iranian people to stand up against the regime and Iran's going to be squeezed. Here's the problem. These clerics who live in the 12th century over there and do all these bad things to their people, now they have an excuse, Rick, because when people get squeezed and the economy gets tough, they're going to say, Trump did it.
Yeah. No, not Trump. The Americans did it.
Well, the Americans, you're correct. The Americans did it. When the nuclear deal was done, there were people in the streets protesting the Iranian government because there was they couldn't blame us.
Right.
They had the sanctions undone. So this is not going to foster a revolution over there. A lot of the Iranians like us over there, but it's not going to foster a revolution.
Do you really think Trump has that in mind?
Oh,
do you
I
think he's
so.
capable of thinking that
Yes.
in depth?
I think John Bolton, National Security Advisor, has convinced him that this is the step to take, when in actuality, it's going to lead to potential closing of the Strait of Hormuz, potentially by the Iranians, because they have nothing to lose, and that could lead to a conflict and jets and missiles in World War III.
And $4 a gallon.
China and Russia will go with, obviously, will go with Iran, and Saudi Arabia and Israel will go with us. And then we are going to be into one heck of a confrontation with Iran. Now, I'm not saying the regime are sweethearts. They're not good. But this is certainly not going to do anything to them, because they will, again, blame us.
Yeah, but, John Bolton came in after Trump did away with the nuclear deal and put us on this path, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or am I wrong?
Well, he came in May, but he had a lot of influence in the process. He was on his way. Tillerson renewed it, and then he went out and Pompeo was on his way in, and then it went against the deal.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think Bolton's one of the scariest people in government right now, and I fear him every day. I think I fear him more than Trump because I don't think Trump has the idea in his head.
Right.
I think Bolton. You're right. It's probably whispering in his ear, and not good stuff.
He
Bob.
wants war. Mm-hmm.
He likes he likes to blow things up as long as it's not him.
Sure.
Sad stuff, Bob. I appreciate the thoughts and the
Thank
time,
you,
man.
Rick.
Always good.
Thank you.
Always good stuff. Our good friend Bob Ney. Talking. It's just I'm literally mind stopped over the idea of war with Iran. And like he said, look, if it starts with Iran, the Chinese and the Russians are going to side with Iran, and it's going to be this you're seeing the world drawn up. Like he said, look, if it starts with Iran, the Chinese and the Russians are going to side with Iran, and it's going to be this you're seeing the world drawn up already. Not good. Not good. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For working people. On the talk.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1919. That was the day that stages across New York City went dark. Actors Equity went on strike against the Producing Managers Association. Up until that time, stage actors often faced poor working conditions. They had little protections from being fired, often had to pay for their own costumes, and were rarely paid for rehearsal time. Equity members decided to go on strike. They demanded rehearsal pay, an 8-performance week, and holiday pay. That night, 12 productions were canceled. One was called Lightnin'. Unable to resist the play on words, the cast members hired a bus with a banner reading, "Lightnin' Struck." The striking actors received support from the stagehands and musicians. On August 18th, a week-long series of benefit performances were put on for the striking actors, kicked off by a parade. W.C. Fields served as the MC. Actor Brandon Tynan adopted a speech by Mark Antony from Julius Caesar for the occasion. Friends, brothers, sisters, countrymen, lend me your ears. Behind us, we have more than 5 million men and women. The ship of hope, the American Federation of Labor. Now, dear public, our great public, will you stand up and show that you are with us and join our cry, equity, equity, equity. The strike continued and expanded to theaters in Chicago. Finally, after 30 days, the producers agreed to negotiate. The theaters had lost $3 million in revenue, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, they signed a 5-year contract. And with that, the curtain dropped on a successful equity strike. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
So, some good news coming out of Baltimore. The Baltimore Sun is reporting that there's been a year-long process of trying to privatize Baltimore's water and sewage systems. We've seen this happen all across the country. Evidently, today, it's being reported that there's going to be an amendment to the city's charter that will be introduced at a special meeting of the city council to make it illegal to privatize the city's sewer and water. And look, this again, one of those common sense things. I've been screaming about privatization of our commonly held, of the commons, of our stuff for years. And, I went back home to Cleveland, where a relative was complaining that their water bill is like $100 a month. To where just a couple of years ago, it was half of that. And it's only going to, the more we privatize, because look, It's not about providing just the service. It's about providing the service and themselves profit. Water and sewer are kind of things we should be able to do that ourselves. I don't know if there should be a profit margin to providing clean water to every citizen of the country. I don't know that I buy it. Don't know that I buy it. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back with our good friend Propane Jane. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
Donald Trump bragged in 2016 that, quote, "I know words. I have the best words." Well, occasionally he does use some very fine words that convey great promise, as in this sentence: "I'm going to fight for every person in this country who believes government should serve the people, not the donors and special interests." Trump also declared he would, quote, "drain the swamp" to rid Washington of those creepy, crawly special interest lobbyists. Excellent words, but they only matter if the speaker actually means them, backing their rhetorical promise with action. As we've seen, though, far from draining the swamp, Trump converted the White House itself into a fetid cesspool of lobbyists, corporate executives, and banksters. His transition team was almost exclusively made up of those swamp critters. His glitzy inaugural celebration was bankrolled by big oil, big coal, big pharma, and other bigs that attached their legislative and regulatory demands to the checks they donated. Most of his top officials come straight out of Wall Street and corporate suites, turning Trump's government into a sump pump that is routinely funneling billions of dollars in special regulatory favors to the moneyed elite. When asked why he put Wall Street hucksters in charge of economic policy, he offered this scramble of words that inadvertently revealed his true plutocratic soul. "I love all people, rich or poor, but in these positions, I just don't want a poor person." This is Jim Hightower saying, "Really? Not even one official who understands poverty from firsthand experience and could not only give you advice, but also some understanding? And what about those hard-hit middle-class workers Trump always talks about? Nope. He hasn't appointed a single one to a top policy position. So forget Trump's words. If the poor and middle class aren't in his government, they're not in his heart either, nor in his policies."
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
All I can do is ask the question. My people came to me, Dan Coates came to me, and some others. They said they think it's Russia. I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be, but I really do want to see the server. But I have confidence in both parties.
Yes, shame, 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 shame. And look, he's not doing himself any good. Please, Donald, keep tweeting. Please, especially about the Trump Tower meeting. Because remember, it didn't happen, and then it happened, but it was about something else. And now it's about, it was just about getting dirt on Hillary, and I'm waiting for what's next. And in fact, it's being reported that the people around Trump are begging him, please stop tweeting. You're only making things worse. Which is why, again, keep it up there, Donald. Keep it up. Anyway, here to share some thoughts and talk about some of the last week's events, our good friend Propane Jane. Jane, thanks for taking time for us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me back.
So are you on the stop tweeting or continue? Just keep doing what you're doing, Donald. Doing great.
Well, I happen to have a piece called The Telltale Tweet. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I haven't seen it, but I'm going to go look for it.
This goes back to probably, I'd say, around March of 2017. And I kind of made reference to the similarities between Trump's tweeting habits and the main character in Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart. And, basically the story there is that Trump is hearing this heartbeat in the background, which, could be symbolized by, it symbolizes Mueller's investigation. And week by week, there's this drip, 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 and, they're onto him. And this is how he feels. And so he hears the investigation dragging on and beating on, and he's begging them just to rip up the floorboards. And so what happens is he makes these utterances every so often where he either completely contradicts himself. He's always lying, of course. So there's constant lying. And I think what you see happening is that the lies are contradicting the other lies. And it seems like it's actually, doing nothing but just offering up more probable cause and more grounds for him to be subpoenaed and brought in front of Mueller for an interview.
I hope that happens, but
yeah.
I know it's not going to be voluntary. Look, there was a brief second where I thought Trump's ego would override, any critical thinking skills.
Yeah.
I'm kind of thinking that even he knows sitting across from Mueller's team and having to answer questions would be a bad thing for him, even though he has the best words.
Yeah, and I think that all the legal advice, even the advice he gets from Fox News is don't ever sit down with Mueller, because
no, it'd be my advice.
You'll incriminate yourself.
I'd be the one going, dude, you're screwed here. You should stop. You have the Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. Use it.
Well, but he's driven by his ego, like you said, and he's not really working off of this self-preservation that would have a logical mind in these situations. I think he very much takes all of this personally. And, the way he chooses to characterize it as a witch hunt is just not consistent with what's happening day by day in reality. The Manafort trial is underway, and people are actually, Rick Gates is getting on the stand and confessing to actual crimes. And so, in reality, it's not a witch hunt, but that again is a very direct confrontation and contradiction of this delusion that he's had this whole time. And I think it's just making him decompensate further.
Yeah, it's crazy stuff. And look, keep it up. Keep trying, because I don't know if you saw the picture of the two idiots at the latest rally with the I'd rather be Russian than a Democrat.
I did.
I look at those people, and I heard Rick Gates today. I saw the story that Rick Gates said, yeah, we broke all these laws and we did all these illegal things.
Yeah.
I look at those two guys who I hope did not procreate, because let's hope those genes end right there. Is it possible for those two, hearing Gates say, yeah, we broke all these laws, we committed all these crimes, is it possible when Mueller lays all this stuff on the table and there's irrefutable evidence that they colluded, that they did all of these things, is it possible for those two, what you see those kind of folks, is it possible for them to come around to going, maybe we were wrong?
No.
It took me a long time to get that out. And all I got was a no.
I'm sorry. I'm just...
No, it was the expected answer.
Yeah, I think this is... okay, similarly, if you just think of your favorite mafia movie, and I think typically, the way that the lore of mafia movies go, if you really get into the series, it's something where you start to identify with the sociopath, you identify with the mobsters, you identify with the gangsters. And it's not necessarily considered a bad thing to be on their side in a lot of ways. There's a whole, generation of hip-hop and rap music that is very closely linked to Scarface, and just that character and that mindset. And so I think that, that's what I always talk about in terms of sociopathy. there are aspects of those characters that are alluring to people. And not necessarily even people who clinically are sociopaths, but there's just something about somebody who breaks the rules and makes their own rules and doesn't really care what authority thinks and is just making deals and is so powerful and has all these people that are loyal to him. And, I think there's a mystique about that type of person. And that's what you see happening with the Republican base. I mean, I saw a statistic today that said something like 58 or 59% of white, no college educated people, Republicans are, still in support and approve of everything that Trump is doing. I mean, that's 58%.
Yeah, but are we surprised?
He's a hero for them.
Yeah, but are we surprised at that? I mean, look, the Republican Party, who's been who the Republican Party is, but they've been moving towards this for a while. And I mean, you looked over the weekend in Portland, you had these, these Nazis, white supremacists, these degenerates. I don't know what to call. I actually don't know what to call them. Is there a better name than Nazi, white supremacist, or degenerate? I mean, is there anything better than that?
I mean, I think that pretty much sums it up. I mean, in another country, if we were reporting news on other countries, we'd call them insurgents, right? Or we'd call them rebels, or, there would be a word that had, in some places they would be considered terrorists.
Yeah,
right?
I wouldn't use rebel because I think they would take great pride in that.
Oh, of course they would. But these are people who were flying the Gadsden flag, and take pride in being called even deplorable. So I think, we are past the point of being surprised that people who cheerleaded this man from the moment he came down the escalator, despite knowing sort of all of the tawdry bits of his history, we shouldn't be surprised that today they're still sticking with him, no matter how much more corruption gets exposed. And how much more of this habitual lying that goes on.
Yeah, well, let me ask you this, because, a couple of days ago, there was a big meeting. Trump surrounded himself with a bunch of African-American pastors. You had this Daryl Scott who said that, I guess I have to read the whole quote for anyone to understand it. This is probably the most proactive administration regarding urban America and the faith-based community in my lifetime, said Daryl Scott. This president actually wants to prove something to our community, our faith-based community, and our ethnic community. This is probably going to be, do you want to finish it?
No, you go ahead.
The most pro-black president I've seen in my lifetime. Look, Trump does a nice job of, I remember when the historically black college university presidents were all surrounded with him. They took a nice picture, and then the next day he screwed them over by taking some funds away. How do you sit there and say that?
Was this before or after the LeBron tweet?
That's a good question.
Suffice it to say that these are stunts that are being pulled for optics that are being sent out to predominantly white communities. The message that Trump is anti-black, is racist, is on the side of white supremacists has already been out to the black community since the election of 2016. He's not moving, whatever photo ops he does with whoever people are willing to sort of sell themselves out for those moments, that's not moving the numbers for him with the black community in America. What's actually solidifying the numbers are these incidents where he's tweeting that, LeBron James has a low IQ amidst this awesome breaking news that is all over black radio and black television, that LeBron James, used his power and his status to open a school that sounds like a really, awesome school.
And as I tweeted out, it should be what every public school looks like.
Exactly. And here he is, doing this thing, and not just, shut up and dribbling. And then all of a sudden, here comes Trump, who is a megalomaniac, right? And he's so narcissistic that he can't handle anyone getting those types of positive accolades across the board, let alone, someone like LeBron James, who's obviously been very vocal about Black Lives Matter, and has also been very vocal against Trump and against the racism that he's espoused, in response to the Black Lives Matter movement and the protest against police brutality. So, I don't think any of those stunts mean anything to the people that they optically are supposed to be getting at. Those are just ploys to satisfy the, kind of white moderate who wants to feel like, no, he can't be what everybody's saying that he is.
Yeah,
that's just for them.
I look at it and I go, how'd you find 20 people who'd sit in a room with him? And I understand all of these people are on somebody's payroll. That, at least it's my view, and you may disagree with me, but I think all of these folks, someone's greasing their palms.
Oh, of course. I mean, how do you find Clarence Thomas?
Yeah, good point.
I mean, how do you find Ben Carson? I mean, we always say we're not a monolith. Of course, there are people who are out here who are willing to, put themselves out there. But ultimately, when the rubber meets the road and you look at the policy and you look at who's actually working in the communities, and who's actually building bridges with these communities, it's a no-brainer. And he's dealing with a group of voters that are very attuned to what's going on and are not going to be fooled by that.
So would it be safe then to say that, maybe, this could be the third oldest profession?
Most definitely.
Just kind of throwing that out there?
Yeah.
Selling your soul?
Well, I mean, in Django, I don't know if you've seen Django, Samuel Jackson's character, I think he plays that role very well. There's sort of always that individual. Uncle Tom's Cabin obviously picks up on that, and that's where the colloquial term comes from. Even in more popular culture, there's the Boondocks, and they have Uncle Ruckus as a character. And that character is something that's prominently displayed, I think, in Black pop culture because that person is always a known entity. Maybe there's that one. I mean, maybe it's not like going and sitting down at Thanksgiving, in a white family and, maybe you have 3 uncles or 4 uncles or whoever, however much when you add it up, are Fox News heads or whatever. The proportions might be off, but I think we all in every community have those people that you're kind of like, man, you're just going to sing, dance to your own tune. And that's just where they are, Bless their heart.
Bless their See, now I've got 2 guests who say that now. All right. So it must be a Southern thing. I don't know.
Oh, absolutely.
But, going back to the school that LeBron James, because he's been doing that for a while. In fact, I know a couple of people from Akron, and one of them was saying that, he was involved in a school and, and he was paying for, kids to go to college once they got out. And one of the kind of the funny stories was that, if you were starting to fall behind and you weren't doing your homework and, you were struggling, he would call you and kind of give you a pep talk and, kind of see what you needed. And it turned out that a bunch of the kids were screwing up on purpose just so he would call them. Yeah. And then, he had to institute a rule and say, look, if I call you a second time, well, then you're done.
Yeah.
But, it's just, he's been doing this for a while. And I wasn't surprised when I saw this all come out. What I have been surprised about is that no one is saying that, why doesn't every public school do this?
Right.
Why isn't this what we give every child, regardless of zip code or regardless of region or any of that? Why isn't this the standard?
Yeah, I mean, I think because we've divested so much from the public education system, as a means of, beating back integration and beating back the ascendancy of marginalized groups. I'm a Texan. My parents were born and raised in Texas. They attended segregated high school, and they just actually had a school reunion back in East Texas in their hometown. And, every time that they go, we always just like to hear the stories because, it just seems like something out of a movie because it's just from another place and time. But, this time we were talking about it and he was telling me how his younger sister had the opportunity to integrate. She had the choice as to whether to go to the segregated high school and that he did as well. But, by the end of it, he was a senior or whatever, and he was just like, hey, I'll just continue on with the segregated school thing. And that's, I think, a really salient time in America's history, because all of these localities, once schools integrated, the public schools integrated, they had a choice as to whether they were going to continue on that path to where there would be, some level of equality, right? I mean, that if everybody kind of attended the same schools, the same amount of money was poured into them, the same resources were poured into them, that, all things considered, you would think that most kids would kind of end up on somewhat equal footing as they face the world and their future. But unfortunately, what we've continued to see happening over the last, 60 years, since Brown v. Board, is that, they found ways to, again, the way we talk about gerrymandering districts in politics, they found ways to starve, certain districts because they are more, predominantly people of color versus these other districts versus the charter schools versus the private school vouchers and all sorts of ways that they're manipulating the public school system.
Yeah, and I always find it interesting that we all the bad ideas happen to poor people, and all of the people who need it the most get the resource from them. Because look, I grew up in Cleveland in the 70s. I grew up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland, and I was one of the few white kids in the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. We used to play a great game called Chase the White Kid and beat the snot out of him. I'm sure it was a fun game. I often joke that I was half black. The other half was blue, obviously. But anyway, what they did to poor people in our neighborhood is they threw them all on buses.
Yeah.
And they drove us all around the city.
Yeah.
And it turned out that didn't work either. But boy, the people who owned the buses and made the buses and, owned the fuel and all of that stuff, they made out really, really well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's why when we talk about, there's all this talk about democratic socialism and so much of the reason why these socialist policies didn't really take hold in America is because we are so heterogeneous ethnically, and it's hard to sort of share resources and count on an equal distribution when certain people don't want to share with other people because they don't like how they look or they don't like the languages they speak.
What is that about us, though? I mean, this idea that I can do better if only the other guy across the street gets to do better, and then we say no because they're going to get better off. Screw it, I don't want to be better off. It just seems it's mind numbing to me.
Yeah, I mean it's tribalism, and it goes back to the beginning of humanity. I know that doesn't necessarily make it easier to cope with in the present day, but I think societies have always found ways to segregate themselves and prop certain groups of people up compared to other groups of people based on some readily identifiable traits that they may have. And if, no matter where you go around the world, even within certain ethnicities, they still discriminate against each other based on how fair their skin tone is.
Well, look, I grew up in a neighborhood where, truth be told, there were a number of mixed race couples, and they had kids. They used to call them mulattoes. I don't know what we call them today, but they didn't have friends either because they either they weren't white enough or they weren't black enough. It was just weird because even at that age, being 10, 11 years old, I'm thinking that is there no way that we ever get past any of this? And I truly believe even if we were all lily white with blonde hair and blue eyes, we would still figure out a way to hate each other.
Well, you'd have to ask Sweden, right? I mean, when you look at their socialist policies, they do very well there. And it is a more homogeneous society. And so there are, examples of this happening around the world, and it typically goes a lot more smoothly the more, the more people look alike and sound alike and the less they have to hold against each other. And I think what we see happening in these major, pockets of civilization, if you look at Brexit, if you look at the UK, I mean, they're also struggling with this issue of immigration and how much do we want to, make our society a melting pot, and the traditional majorities feeling very threatened by the emergence of these new majorities. And so I think that's just the socio-political, cultural time that we're living in.
So is the natural course of events that we all self-segregate? I mean, because you could argue that, maybe there were policies, but at the end of the day, we kind of still congregate amongst our own. I mean, is that an argument?
I think the scale tends towards more variation. And like you said, back in the day, there were certain mixes that that now there are way more mixes than that. And this is why this is a whole, cottage industry now with these Ancestry DNA kits and 23andMe, and people want to see how mixed they are, And so even though I think there's a subset of people who don't want that mixing to happen, they're still on the majority and on the whole, you can't really turn back that tide. But I just think that, where we are in terms of when they say demographics will shift and majority-minority will change, we're on the cusp of that. And I think that's why right now it's so tumultuous and people are so fired up about it.
Do you think that, most white people who are, they're kind of worried that what's going to happen to them once we're the minority?
Yeah. I mean, that's what they say. I mean, if you just listen to if you actually brace yourself and listen to, what has been, so cutesy called the alt-right, if you listen to what they say, I mean, they say that diversity is genocide. They say that they are trying to protect this Anglo-American heritage, so to speak. And I think they're very explicit about what their fears are and what their concerns are. And I also think that's why they chose an anti-immigration candidate, an anti-diversity candidate like Donald Trump. And this is why we have what's happening at the border, which is essentially an ethnic cleansing. And we don't say it in those terms, but this is what is allowed to happen, and this is what they mean by "Make America Great Again." And all signs keep pointing to that. And so we would be crazy at this point, and not in a clinical way, but it would just be absurd for us to, continue to be surprised by it.
Yeah, it's just crazy. We're living, they say, may you live in interesting times. I prefer interesting, not crazy. Just kind of a thought. Jane, I appreciate the time, the thoughts. Great stuff as always. Thanks so much.
All right. You're welcome. Have a great week.
Always make me laugh. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
This is why we fight, why we lie awake. This is why we fight.
Finally, radio for the rest of us. Rick Smith.
It was easily the warmest non-El Nino year on record.
2017 shattered another global heat record.
The so-called car fire has burned nearly 150 square miles.
Firefighters begin to gain ground against deadly California wildfires. Global heat wave continues to rage across Northern Hemisphere. Plus,
21 kids across the nation are seeking to end the use of fossil fuels, contributing to global warming. And they want to hold the federal government accountable for it.
U.S. Supreme Court rules that climate kids will have their day in court.
All of those rulings and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
We have to keep the icebergs from melting. My solution, we give every iceberg a desk job, right? Because American offices always have the air conditioning on way too high. Nothing can melt in there.
Not this office. It's sweltering here. This is your Green News Report.
Even the iceberg would be like, oh, does anyone have a jacket I can borrow, please?
Okay, Desi Doyen, we're in Los Angeles. We don't need no stinking air condition out here. Or at least that used to be the case.
Yep, it's a little bit too hot for my tastes, but the rest of the world is getting warmer too. 2017 has now gone down in the record books as the third warmest year ever recorded globally. That's according to the massive annual State of the Climate report released on Wednesday by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the American Meteorological Society. According to NOAA climate scientist Deke Arndt in a press call, what is remarkable is that 2017 came in as the third warmest year without an El Nino to boost global temperatures.
It was easily the warmest non-El Nino year on record. And the last 4 years, 14, 15, 16, and 17, are the four warmest years on record and substantially warmer than the previous, kind of establishing a new neighborhood in terms of global temperature. And 2017 reinforced that.
So in years that didn't include an El Nino, 2017 was by far the warmest.
Yes. And NOAA also found that greenhouse gases in the atmosphere in 2017 reached the highest levels ever recorded. Ocean temperatures were the highest on record, and rising sea levels also hit a new high. NOAA oceanographer Gregory Johnson warned that higher sea levels are now baked in, even if humanity stopped releasing greenhouse gases today.
I sort of think of the oceans like a freight train. And that freight train is now moving, and actually it will continue to move. So if we were to freeze greenhouse gases at the level they are today, the oceans would continue to warm and seas continue to rise for centuries to millennia because of the majestic timescale of the ocean circulation.
Not good.
Nope, not good at all. And so far, 2018 is on track to be the fourth hottest year on record. And the impacts of global warming continue to pile up. In Northern California, firefighters are gaining ground on the Carr Fire near the city of Redding. It now ranks as the seventh most destructive fire in California state history, burning more than 150 square miles. It's also just one of 17 major fires burning in the state that combined have destroyed more than 1,000 homes and killed at least 8 people. New blazes are erupting elsewhere in California and across the western U.S., amid a sustained heat wave and high winds.
And it should be noted, we're not even anywhere close to the peak of fire season. That doesn't happen until usually late September or October.
Yeah, but fire season in California is pretty much year-round now.
It is now, yep.
But some good news, Oregon's state Supreme Court has handed a major victory to Portland, upholding a city ordinance that restricts fossil fuel infrastructure, one of the strongest measures in the nation. The ordinance limits the size and number of fossil fuel export terminals and storage facilities within city limits in order to reduce the impacts of air and water pollution. Business groups sued to block the ordinance, but the court affirmed Portland's constitutional right to limit and even prohibit new fossil fuel infrastructure.
Well done, Portland.
Finally, the United States Supreme Court this week has ruled that kids suing the U.S. government over climate change can go to trial. The nation's highest court unanimously rejected an attempt by the Trump administration to dismiss the lawsuit brought by 21 children and young adults and the nonprofit environmental group Our Children's Trust. The kids are suing to force the federal government to act on climate change, arguing that failure to do so violates their constitutional rights to life, liberty, and property, quote, as enshrined in the Due Process Clause of the Fifth Amendment. While the court sounded a note of caution over the breadth of the lawsuit, the justices nevertheless will allow the children and their lawsuit to have their day in court.
Well done, kids. And thank you for saving us all. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us, follow us, and share us worldwide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
The kids are all right. 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 No matter how hard you try, you can't stop us now.
The proud defender of the American dream, Rick Smith.
Since the prehistoric ages, and the days of ancient Greece, walked down to the Middle Ages, planet Earth kept going through changes, and then the Renaissance came, and times continue to change. Nothing stayed the same, but there were always renegades.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So this past weekend, the big Netroots Nation conference, this year in New Orleans. Wish we could have gone. We spent our time in Alaska for our Teamster event. But I think I went to the first 4 of them. The first 4 years that Netroots happened, we went to the first 4 of them. We've been back in a couple years, maybe next year. Maybe next year. But here to talk a little bit about the big event over the weekend. I've asked our good friend Celeste to come talk with us. She's Trade and Globalization Policy Specialist with the AFL-CIO. Celeste, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me, Rick. Good to be here.
So what do we think? How was the big Netroots?
You know, it was actually my first time. So, you know, we usually have a pretty good labor presence at these events, but it was the first time I'd been down, and it was pretty amazing. Just the sort of power in the room, from whether it was, you know, Daily Kos, a variety of labor unions, or all the elected officials, and everyone really, I think, trying to impress the progressive activists there and putting on their best show. So I think it was a pretty cool event, and I would like to go again.
Yeah, it was a good dog and pony show, as I've always thought. But were you surprised at the number of politicians? Because when my first thought was, when I went to the first couple, I'm like, why are they here? Why do we need them?
A bit. I was surprised at the number of them. But this must be just one of the stops that they make. Actually, on my flight down there Friday morning, Senator Elizabeth Warren was on my flight, and I was, fangirling out a little bit, like, oh, look, there's Senator Warren. She's obviously going to speak to Netroots, and I'm going to be on a panel. But she was there, Alexandria, what is her name? The woman
Ocasio-Cortez?
Thank you. She was amazing. She was hands down the most inspiring speaker I saw. But Representative Tim Ryan, Joaquin Castro, on and on and on. And so I think it was, it's good to remember that in this time when I think we feel there's such an onslaught and attack of progressive values, an attack on human rights, attack on basic things that, the United States is supposed to stand for, like simple things like the right to vote. It's good to remember that there are like-minded souls. There are people that are passionate and working hard. And so in that sense, I think it's a really good, inspiring kind of event.
Yeah, my first couple of years, as somebody who's a labor person, I didn't think there was enough labor stuff, but they've gotten better over the years.
Good. I think it was pretty good. I always think there can be more, but just sort of in the past, right? In the past 2 years, though, I just noticed that a lot of folks, even who weren't from labor, were using the word union. And that's a change. I remember, watching the State of the Union speeches that President Obama gave and just sort of waiting to hear the word labor, waiting to hear the word union. Even though he was a champion on many issues, it just was something that sometimes Democratic elected officials seem to shy away from and be wary of. And now folks are remembering that, yeah, we are the folks who brought the weekend. We are the folks who brought the 8-hour day and overtime and safe workplaces and all of these things. And they're starting to say the word again and recognize that, if you have a society that doesn't have a strong labor movement, you have a society that doesn't have a middle class, that doesn't have a hope of really living a decent life for most working people. So it was good to hear the word union bandied about a lot.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought that up because I started today's show with talking about, a new book that I've got to get the author on called Squeezed. And her premise is that, since 2008 at least, but prior to that, just to be in the middle class has gotten like 30% more expensive than it was 20 years ago. And in a lot of areas, it's 50%. Just the ability for people to hang on has gotten much more difficult.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, I was just reading yesterday a new Pew study of Generation X, which I am a member of, and you see so many studies about the boomers and the millennials, and sometimes they forget that Gen X is there. But the study was interesting, and it said, there's been so many worries, and we hear in the popular press these worries about, children not being able to do as well as their parents did. And the study showed that Gen X is actually the first generation to be on track not to exceed the economic outcome of its parents. And so, I thought this is really important. Not only should they not overlook our generation, look at the difference in what happened with the boomers to what's happening with our generation, and what are we going to do about it? Are we satisfied? Is that the future we want for America?
Yeah, and
That's
our
the
generation,
future I want.
Our generation is going to be the first one to move into retirement in crisis, because I think of a lot of people that I know who we were the first generation to be really saddled fully with those crummy 401ks. And
yes.
As you know, most 401ks are, empty. And I think the average is like 18 grand, which good luck retiring on that.
Right. That's maybe a half a year of retirement. I'm not sure how far any of us are going to get with 18 grand.
No, I mean, you're gonna work right till you die. So it doesn't surprise me. And look, I've had conversations with a friend of mine who's a couple of decades younger than me. And he says, well, at least you got to grow up as this is the last normal childhood in America. And I go, yeah, okay, yeah. So it gave a last normal childhood for crisis.
Right.
It's just nuts.
I don't know. Yeah, it's nuts what we're going through when the amount of wealth that this country has, and that we've all sort of been around for decade after decade while the rules have changed to concentrate that wealth in the hands of a very few. And as that wealth has been concentrated, the political power comes along with it to change the rules to keep it there. It's this vicious cycle. And then obviously, what I do regarding trade and globalization, that's just one of the many tools to keep concentrating that wealth.
No, it's one of the ways that they destroyed the middle class and obviously made it much more expensive to exist in the middle class. Now, while you were at Netroots, was trade kind of an issue? Because look, they're going to renegotiate NAFTA. I don't know whether it's going to be a good renegotiation or if things are going to get worse. There's the tariff talk, which I've said from the beginning I'm in favor of tariffs. I'm scared to death over Trump boogering it up to where we never talk about them again. And again, things get much worse. Was there any talk of that at the Netroots?
Very little. So the panel I was on, not surprisingly, featured trade, and it was called NAFTA and the midterms. Why we need to fight for a better trade deal, and really even that it was Lori Wallach from Public Citizen. Been a fair trade champion for more than 20 years.
She's great.
Representative Tim Ryan from Ohio, another fair trade champion, Ben Beachy of the Sierra Club, and Colette Pinchon Battle, who's actually from New Orleans and, has been working on climate justice and other issues, really, kind of came to prominence after Hurricane Katrina, and talking about, how many communities of color are on the front lines of environmental devastation that comes as a result of bad trade deals. And we were all talking about sort of the devastation of the current trade model, whether you want to call it corporate trade or neoliberal trade, but, that whole thing that really empowers corporations and disempowers democracy, and how we need to improve it. But kind of what I got from the audience and Colette and, others around was that there's just so much, fear and trepidation of like, well, why is it this guy that's doing it? This is progressive trade. This is our issue. Trade reform is our issue.
Absolutely.
We're the ones who fought and killed the TPP. We fought and killed the free trade agreement of the Americas under Bush. We fought and killed the proposal for the multilateral agreement on investment, would have been the worldwide ISDS back in the 90s under Clinton. We fought and killed all that stuff, and it's exactly what you said on trade and tariffs. Just because the president has so aligned himself with racist policies like the Muslim ban and caging children and doing these things, even though he has put in place some tariffs that are important and that we agree with, to protect the steel and aluminum industry and to confront China on its intellectual property theft, even the simple idea of doing trade in a different way may get a bad name because it's being associated with the current president, who is so devastating for working people across so many other areas. And that's scary to me, because we need trade reform. We've needed trade reform for years. We've lost, 850,000 jobs to Mexico due to NAFTA. We lost 3.4 million jobs to China due to, the bad decision to let China into the WTO without sufficient safeguards. Our wages are flat, and trade is a big part that plays into that. You take a good workplace that has a union in it, decent jobs, decent benefits, probably some retirement security. You shut it down, you pack up the whole factory in many cases, plop it down into some other country that has low labor standards, low environmental standards, and you took what was a middle-class job and you turn it into a dangerous sweatshop job. Well, that weakens unions here, weakens our ability to negotiate for good wages here, and it certainly doesn't bring hardworking people in these developing countries up into the middle class, because they are treated, as sweatshop workers with no rights.
Yep.
So, it's dangerous. It's a dangerous time.
Yeah, and we were told, when NAFTA was being rammed through, that it was going to lift Mexico up. We were going to all do better because all boats were going to rise, except, they didn't.
Right. And it's a great story. And that could happen with a trade agreement that's the right trade agreement. And that means totally different rules than what we've got now. And I will tell you, from what I know and from working with Robert Lighthizer, who is the United States Trade Representative currently under President Trump, they are putting things on the table that, you would be surprised that they're coming out of this administration. They are really, from what we know, and nothing's final till it's final, right? And you can't ever prejudge or pre-endorse or whatever, because you got to read the legal text. But it seems like they are putting down stronger labor rules than what the Obama administration put down. They are actually working to hack away at ISDS, those investor-to-state dispute settlement things that are essentially a private justice system for foreign investors. They are working to strengthen the automobile rules of origin. So there's a lot of things that, from what we know, they're putting on the table. Some of the things, that we would have suggested, that we would have encouraged them to do. And that's, nothing's over, so this is not an endorsement, but it really makes you think, is this, if it is better, how do you get Congress, Democrats in Congress, to vote for it under this president? It's a really challenging time. So
no, look, during the 2016 election, I was saying, look, I'm completely, totally anti-Trump being elected, but he has stolen labor's position on trade and investment in jobs. And look, it's what I've been talking about for, at that point, over a decade. It's what a lot of people in labor were saying we needed to be doing. He was singing off of your playbook, stole your playbook.
Right. Well, and that's what we have to make sure, is that he doesn't steal it. That this, no matter what, that this remains our issue. And so, it's an awkward time, but we have to continue speaking up for our values and our policy preferences around trade. And if those happen to coincide with his, well, so much the better. We just have got to make sure that what we want is totally distinct and distinguished from, where he takes it. Because when he takes his criticism of trade policy to who he blames, unfortunately, it's the Mexican workers that get the blame from him. And in the view of labor, Mexican workers are our brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
You know, the villain are the corporations who choose to offshore jobs, who choose to take good family wage jobs and turn them into sweatshop jobs. It's not the Mexican workers that are the problem.
Right. And the policy that we have that encourages it and where we actually pay for it.
Oh, absolutely. Right. And it socializes any losses they might encounter because it'll give them these rights under ISDS. So they take the profits. The laws incentivize them doing that. And if they happen to take a loss, it might well be that the taxpayers of Mexico end up reimbursing them for that loss. It's just crazy. And that's why, you know, going back to sort of Netrooks and the larger advocacy and elected officials, you know, we have to make sure that whoever the elected officials are, that they understand who they represent. They represent the people of this country, not the capital of this country, not the corporations of this country, but the people. And they have to stand up and start voting for what's right and doing what's right and making the right rules, because these corporations are not moral entities. They're not going to wake up and decide, oh, I've been doing wrong. They have to have the incentives that are in front of them changed, and that means changing our laws.
You're absolutely right. So last question I've got for you, because I don't know about you, but I get email from people all the time who, I can't believe you would side with Trump on these tariffs. And this is horrible. Cranberries, Rick. We're going to ruin the cranberry industry. And look, you know, there's going to be some pain in this, but doing nothing, in my view, is going to be much worse off. This has been something we've been needing to do for decades now. At some point, you've got to fix. You got to plug the dike at some point before you can fix it, even if it is one of the most deplorable people I can imagine.
No, that's exactly right. And I do hear all the time about, wait a minute, did you say you sided with Trump? And I would say, no, I'm siding with working people, and this is our issue. And if we win this, it's a win for us. It's not for him. But we cannot afford, as you said, to do nothing. Doing nothing has contributed to the wage stagnation that we have. It's contributed to what we were talking about Gen X being the first generation that won't do better than our parents, about, you know, the fact that folks in Gen X don't have the prospect of retirement security, you know, much less the millennials, right? That all is tied up with these neoliberal economic rules that favor the wealthy elites, the corporate CEOs, and purposely disfavor the very working people who are creating the profits for the companies. So doing nothing is not an option. We've got to do something. We cannot afford to lose another 3.4 million jobs to China. And yeah, there will be some short-term pain, but the whole premise of tariffs, if they work, now I think it's right to have questions about why the tariffs were put on Canada, and, you know, does the president have a strategy? But if they work, they bring the other party to the table. The other party, you know, being China particularly here, changes its practices. We get to a better place where we have a more level playing field, and then the tariffs are lifted. Right. And you know, it is, I've heard probably 18 times the story of the nail factory that has laid off a few people because of the tariffs. And every job that's lost is a tragedy, because that's a family that has to figure out what to do next in this economy. But if every nail worker there is a tragedy, you know, why wasn't the media out there reporting the 3.4 million tragedies of those who lost their jobs over the past 18 years to China? So, in other words, we got to have a trade system in the long run that's good for farmers, that's good for the folks at the nail factory, that's good for the steel and aluminum industry. I mean, we're smart enough, we're good enough, we can do this right. It's just going to take a little time and a little patience, and nobody's going to come in and save us. You know, Trump is not the savior of the working class. We've got to get out there and do it ourselves, and that starts with the election tomorrow in Missouri against right to work, right, and continues to reform our policies and standing up for worker wins. Not for Trump's win, but for worker wins.
Excellent point. Excellent point. There's a difference between the policy and the person who's bringing it, even if he's going to screw it up. And I fear greatly he screws it up. But Celeste, I appreciate the time. Always great talking with you. I'd love to have you back again real soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me tonight.
Good stuff. Our good friend Celeste Drake. And she's right. Look, that's our issue. It's working people's issues. And, just because Trump's the one out there doing it, there is a big difference in him, saying that he's going to do one thing and what comes out of it. And that's kind of my fear. We'll take a quick break, right back to wrap things up. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.
We chase the penthouse from the basement. Our current rat race, we run to stand still. This is the fading American dream. I've got no time now, keep moving climb now. For a second chance, come on and go wrong. I'm just searching for my dignity. This is the fading American dream. This is the fading American dream. This is the fading American dream.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1835. That was the day that began the Baltimore Bank Riot. The Bank of Maryland had failed in 1834. Thousands of people who had deposited money in the bank saw their savings vanish. For nearly a year and a half, the depositors wanted their money to be returned. Anger grew. Some of that anger was directed at one of the bank's directors, Reverdy Johnson. The bank directors were accused of fraud and speculation that had caused the bank's failure. The bank officials were also dragging their feet on settling accounts with bank clients because the directors wanted to keep their personal fortunes. A crowd gathered around Director Johnson's house and broke out some windows. The mayor of Baltimore ordered a troop of 30 armed guards to protect Johnson's residence. The next day, the angry mob turned their attention to another director, John Glenn. They began to demolish his home before the mounted guards stopped the damage. 2 days later, the mob returned to Director Johnson's home. This time, they were able to overpower the guards. They piled up Johnson's property in the street and set it on fire. The crowd swelled and moved on to destroy property of other bank directors. Revolutionary War veteran Sam Smith organized a militia of 3,000 men to stop the destruction. The leaders of the bank protest were arrested and jailed. The bank directors received $100,000 from the state as compensation for the destruction of their property. The bankers were not held responsible for their actions, which caused the bank to fail. Does this sound familiar? Most of the bankers who caused the 2008 crash also never faced consequences. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm going to this battle, take my union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery for this war is one you're bound to lose. You fascists are bound to lose.
Tomorrow, big day. Big day, Tuesday. Election day. Ohio, a special election. But Missouri going to be the big state in my view. They have a ballot initiative. Proposition A is going to hopefully repeal the right to work that they rammed through. Right to work for right now has been on hold in Missouri since it was rammed through and signed, I guess about 18 months ago, I think it was. This is a huge moment. Because the messaging that could come out of this, I'm always leery about doing things during primary election time. That's always worrisome to me. But the hope is this draws people out. This draws working people out to push back on it, like they did in Ohio back in 2011. To push back against this kind of poison and send a message that and turn the tide. Now the Chamber of Commerce, they put out all their lies and. It's not going to be the end of unions, and things actually are better in the freedom to work states because they're changing it now. It's no longer going to be right to work; it's freedom to work. Because understand what's coming next is the freedom of contract. We're right back in the Lochner era. This stuff is coming fast and furious. And we're all going to suffer because of it. This is what, I just want change. I just want to shake things up. This is what, I want to shake things up gets us. Congratulations. So the hope is the good folks of Missouri tomorrow get out, vote this down. And the proper response, in my view, is no. So if you needed to know what to vote on Proposition A, no. That's simple. If you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go, wherever you go. And always, you can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us anytime at thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.